Right, so greetings, welcome to this Sunday Philosophy Club. Here we are, September the 15th, I believe.
15th.
I'm going to start, 14th, okay. I'm going to start with a singing bowl in honour of Sophie's memory, who's no longer with us, but these are her beautiful crystal singing bowls she had in Brighton, which have now come to live here. And it's just a moment's reflection we remember all the dead, the recent dead, and we honour their memory. And in my case especially, Sophia, my daughter. Right, greetings. Hello. So welcome. I'll just start with a little roundup of what's been going on this week in honour of, the world situation. Yes, to say, the first thing I want to say is we've had a visit here by Claire Hedin, who's a wonderful sound healer and very similar to my daughter. She's moving to Europe, back to Europe from San Francisco, and she spent the weekend here with us. We had an interesting tutorial. She wants to do a PhD with the Global Green University in sound, metaphysics, healing, consciousness, etc. Very much what Sophie was interested in. And it's a shame those two haven't been able to meet. But yeah, Claire's gone back down to the south of France now. She just came from Crete, where she was doing some workshops in a centre dedicated to sound and music, run by Ross Daly, who's an amazing Irish, Greek-based musician of multi, musical talents. I've known his work for 15 years, but I've not ever met him personally, but she was just with him. And before that, she was in Turkey, in Konya, where Sophie and I went. Rumi's grave is there in the mosque. So it's a small world really, and Claire is interested in Sufism and the spiritual traditions of music, in the Orient, in Islamic music, Indian, and of course European music. So that was fascinating, the sounds, that we all come from the sound. In the beginning is the Logos, says the Gospel of St. John. And in the Bible it says God creates the world through speech, through sound, which some people interpret as through song. Tolkien, in his Lord of the Rings, has the world being created through song. And the elves carried that knowledge. So, yes, so we're just... and of course speech is a form of song, and I believe speech and song evolved together. Our ancestors developed speech and song together, tens of thousands of years ago. So that's the first thing. That was very exciting. Then I want to just mention the tragedy, the continuing tragedy in Gaza. Those let up there, apparently. I attended online the Gaza Tribunal run by Jeremy Corbyn MP and other colleagues, an excellent array of speakers, many of them of great stature and significance. Professor Ralph Wild, who spoke, he's an international lawyer at University College, which is, a college dear to my own heart, part of the University of London. He gave testimony on behalf of the Arab League at the case for genocide against Israel brought before the International Court of Justice, which everyone watched on television. He was one of the speakers on behalf of South Africa. And their case, and he's pretty uncompromising in his views that in terms of international law, Israel doesn't actually have a right to be occupying either the West Bank or any part of Palestine. It's an independent state recognised as such by law. Israel has no right to occupy it, and what they're doing in Gaza is utterly against all international law, says Ralph Wild, with arguments and with case studies and with arguments. And I've listened carefully to his testimony given to the Gaza Tribunal. I also listened to Dr. Raz Siegel, who is one of the world's leading genocide scholars, who is Jewish. A lot of the people speaking at the Gaza Tribunal were Jewish, in fact. But they're from a liberal, progressive, intelligent form of Judaism. And they're appalled at what's going on. Raz Siegel said, the actual death toll is probably near 120,000, if you include all the bodies we haven't yet found under the rubble. And yes, this is genocide. 18,000 children are in that death toll now. And it's the highest count of children per combatants, per adults of any war in recent times. Nobody has wars. In Ukraine, it's like much, much, much smaller, although children are dying tragically. But this is like off the scale. So that one of the scholars, in fact I think it was him, said, you can even coin a phrase, unchilding is what Israel is doing to Gaza, i.e. killing the children, which fits in with the idea of a genocide, which is to kill and destroy the entire people. You kill the children. And a lot of the people in Gaza are youth. They're children or they're young adults who are being killed off. We also heard from Francesca Albanese, who is the UN Special Rapporteur on Palestine, and she, was uncompromising in her testimony that it's like become an economic industry. Genocide is something that commercial companies are profiting from, which is shocking, beyond shocking. And she's a very articulate Italian woman, highly intellectual, international human rights expert and so on. She knows what she's talking about. She's been demonised in, the hands of right-wing attacks on her integrity, but I think totally unjustifiably. So I've been, listening to all that, and I'm still working through. There are about 30, speeches to the Gaza Tribunal. I'm listening to one or two every evening. I've listened to the bulk of them, but I've still got more to go, and I think they're all worth listening to. It all took place at Church House near Westminster Abbey, and I've been there. And I strongly recommend people to listen to it. It's online. You can just listen to it for free, and it's a really important part of our collective education as a planet, so that we know what's been going on this last 2 years. And it really does say, well, hang on, Israelis or some Israelis are very keen to say, no, it's not genocide, it's justified self-defense. But these expert witnesses take that argument apart, piece by piece. I heard last night, I was listening to someone from the Campaign Against the Arms Trade, CAT, which is a British-based campaigning group against the arms trade worldwide. I had links with them. Its Secretary General used to be a man called Tony Jameson, who was a friend of mine, and it's an amalgam of groups, many of them Christian groups. I was on the board of the Anglican Pacifist Fellowship back in those days, and we were one of the groups that founded this Campaign Against the Arms Trade, because it's crazy. Anyway, the current secretary spoke about this, highly articulate Irish woman called Katie Fallon, and she focused on the F-35 fighter jets that are raging across Gaza and delivering these really, really powerful bombs that are blowing it up bit by bit, block by block. Now they're focusing on Gaza City, which was reasonably unscathed. They're just blowing the whole thing up. And people in the buildings are being killed and buried in the rubble. Now these F-35 fighter jets, which are carrying 2,000-pound bombs, dropping them on unprotected kids, basically. The jets are American, but they're serviced by a spare part pool, which is largely from Britain. And what Kat have found out is that British companies, and she named a bunch, are vital to the full functioning of these F-35 fighter jets, keeping them in the air, because of course there's wear and tear, bits run out. They're highly sophisticated fighting machines. And they're flying over Gaza 5 times the normal rates that Israel normally flies these jets. They have about 35 of these things. And they're delivering bombs continuously, thanks to British companies that are supplying the spare parts. And although the British government, under David Lammy as Foreign Secretary, he's now Deputy Prime Minister, said, oh, we're going to stop the arms trade to Israel, what they've actually done is just, they ship the parts to a neutral country or another country, like the Netherlands, and then they're shipped to Israel, so that they can say in Parliament, no, we're not shipping directly to Israel anymore. Well, I mean, come on. You know, as this woman said in her testimony, it's a scam. Of course they're still supplying Israel, they're just sending it through a third party. And what arms trade campaign are calling for is an actual embargo, so that these spare parts no longer go to these jets flying above Gaza, causing absolute maelstrom and genocide. She calls them the genocide jets, and when the history is written up, that's what they will be known as. So anyway, I was listening to this late last night. She's an amazing woman, this young Irish activist. And that's the calibre of the kind of people that are speaking at this Gaza Tribunal. So do listen to it, it's incredibly important. I've been following the fallout of the attack by Israel on Qatar, which is a sovereign independent Arab state, capital Doha, and they've been trying to mediate for the last 2 years between Israel and Hamas, playing fair broker. I discovered from 2018, I wrote to the Emir of Kuwait, of Qatar, because he gave a brilliant speech to the UN General Assembly, and I was impressed. They're highly diplomatic, highly educated Muslim culture. I think it's his wife, the Sheikha of Qatar, is 100% into education. They've started a curriculum for schools, the greening of education. They have a whole campus dedicated to ecology and spirituality and peace, and the Qataris are amazing people, and that's why they've been hosting all these mediation talks. And what Israel did is, against all the rules of international diplomacy and just common sense, is somehow through their intelligence spy networks, they discovered, probably from the phones of the mediators, that the Hamas people were going to be meeting in a certain villa on the outskirts of Doha. And they were going to be discussing the latest ceasefire proposals that are being put forward, and to say, yes, we agree or we don't. And it's part of the ongoing negotiations, right? I think Israel have put forward some. And instead of allowing that process of peacemaking to go ahead, Israel fired bombs on the villa to kill all the top Hamas decision makers who were discussing the ceasefire proposal. So that shows you their attitude to peacemaking and diplomacy. Fortunately, thanks be to God, nobody quite knows how, the really top commanders decided to leave that building, that room, just before the attack. Sixth sense, they went off to do some prayers, I think. So the actual death didn't include the top leaders. It included, however, the son of one of them, and many others. 6 people were killed. So
amongst them, one Qatari security guard.
And a security guard from Qatar, yeah. Now, what does that do for Israel's credentials as a fair peacemaker, a fair party that you can have peace talks with? I mean, the implication of that is anyone that ever wants to make a peace deal with Israel is at risk of being bombed wherever you are in the world. If I was an Israeli, and I've travelled there and I have many Israeli friends, I love the country, I'd be appalled at this going on in the name of Israel, because it's against everything in the international law codes, it's against morality, it's against spirituality, it's against ethics. But Netanyahu and his war cabinet think this behaviour is acceptable. Well, I don't agree, and I've been listening in detail to some of the responses by the Arab world, the Arab League, the Islamic Organisation of Cooperation. I mean, they're really cross. Even Saudi Arabia, which is normally kind of quite reserved in its criticisms of Israel, has now said, no, that's it, that's the end. We're no longer going to play as if that's normal.
I believe, as we speak, all the Arab leaders are now in a meeting in Doha, in Qatar.
Yes. I think they've called together. The Qataris have huge diplomatic leverage throughout the Middle East. It's where the Al Jazeera television station is based, which is one of the best sources of information on the Middle East and has been for years. My nephew has done documentaries for them. I often go to it for information on the Middle East, and so they're highly respected people, the Qataris, and they're having a meeting to see what should be done. I know that in Turkey, in Pakistan, in all Middle Eastern countries, Saudi Arabia, they're absolutely furious at this and debating what the response should be. So we'll see, we'll watch that with interest. And one of my colleagues, who is got his finger on the pulse of all this, who lives in Turkey, is a Scottish intellectual called Moeen Yassin. I've known him for over 25 years. He was a friend of Dr. Carl Shapley, who ran the New World Academy, and whose father, Harlow Shapley, was the astronomer at Harvard University who discovered the shape of the universe, was a close friend of the President, Roosevelt. And Carl told me he put the S into UNESCO, because Harlow was advising Roosevelt when UNESCO was being dreamed up. And he said, don't forget science, or it would have been called UNESCO, United Nations Education and Culture Organization. He said, no, put the S in, science. So Harlow's a great man. His son, Carl, was a close friend of mine and introduced me to Moeen Yassin. And although Carl is dead, bless his soul, Moeen is still going strong, and he's like really busy monitoring the Arab street, the internet, the response over this whole crisis in Gaza. And we're collaborating in a conference which will be in December on interfaith eschatology. So we're going to be jointly running a very important conference in December, which will be online. People are welcome to attend, listen, or if you think you've got something to say and you want to give a talk, then contact me or Moeen. Eschatology is the science of last things. It's a branch of theology. Eschaton is the Greek word for the ultimate goal of things. It's where we're all going. And eschatology is the science of final goals. Where are we going as a planet? It's also individually, our personal eschatology is when our physical form dies and our soul reverts to the spiritual kingdom. Where do we go? What happens? That's the study of eschatology in the micro level. But collective eschatology is what happens to this planet as a whole. Where are we going to go? Are we going to blow it up prematurely in the next 10, 20 years? Are we going to have a third world nuclear war? God forbid. Or are we going to get over this blip and learn to coexist in civilized harmony between all faiths and religions, as I want and as Moeen wants? So we'll be debating this at this conference in December. What is the future for humanity, and where are we going? What do the holy texts say? What scripts can we read? How do we interpret them? All those kind of things we'll be discussing. So that's important. The other thing I want to say is that before then, and next week, September the 20th, I'm mindful of the fact that we've just had the 11th of September, the anniversary of the blowing up of the Great Twin Towers in New York, and the planes flying into them and what happened. So I've written a 2-volume book about this, going into enormous detail, which I wrote in 2018, 2019, in fact. And I think I came to the conclusion that the official story of Bush and his commission under Mr. Jellicoe was false. It was deliberately misinformation. They didn't hear the right information. They never considered the fate of Building 7, which is another huge building that collapsed on its own footprint, which was never even hit by planes. So I think I start from the assumption that the researchers who found nanothermite in the rubble realised that the buildings had been pre-wired to collapse from within, timed when the jets hit to make it look like they'd collapsed them. But all the engineers who studied the matter say those planes could not have brought down those towers, let alone Building 7 that wasn't even hit by one. So So this is a mystery, and I'm organising a conference for the International Historical Commission on 9/11, which meets every year. We're going to have our meeting on September the 20th. If anyone who hears this talk is interested in those mysteries, has information to share, or just wants to listen, then you can contact me, and I'll send you the Zoom invite. There have been some interesting new developments in 9/11 research. We've lost some of the key thinkers, but other new people are coming along. And I hope to hear from some of them at the talk, at the conference. So it'll be on, as I say, Saturday the 20th of September. Now the next day we have the start of the UN General Assembly, UNGA as it's called, which is one of the most important events of the year. It's International Peace Day. The world's leaders go to New York and speak in the UN General Assembly building, which is in the headquarters of the UN. I've been there. I've spoken at the UN headquarters in one of the seminar rooms off there, and I peeked into the General Assembly room whilst I was visiting. It's huge and impressive, and this is a really important day in the calendar of the UN and the world, and it'll go on 22nd, 23rd, 24th, 25th, because each world leader or country member of the UN speaks in New York, and you hear from presidents, heads of state, or foreign ministers, and it's a way of sounding the pulse of different nations, and it's really interesting. And at this General Assembly, Britain, France, and other countries, Canada, Australia, are due to recognise Palestine officially. So watch those speeches carefully, and those speeches, David Lammy will probably give it for Britain. They will be saying, we, the British, are now recognising Palestine, enough is enough, because Britain said, Starmer said, we will recognise Palestine unless Israel, stops its carnage in Gaza and starts behaving like a normal nation and presents a roadmap to peace. Well, they haven't done that. So logically, it follows they're going to recognise Palestine, which is long overdue in my opinion. And then there's the fracas that the USA is denying visas to the Palestinian diplomats who should be there. But there are Palestinian staff who will be there, but not like the top ones. So that's going to be very interesting to watch. I've also been busy behind the scenes working with my Liberal Democrat Philosophy Forum, which is hopefully going to have a meeting this term, featuring some sort of leading intellectual who represents that lineage. The Social Democrat, Liberal Democrat tradition merged and formed the Liberal Democrat Party in Britain, which is sort of left-centre. It's the intelligence centre, if you want, of British politics. And it's doing quite well. It's got 71 MPs at the time, which is a very high, quora, and I wish them well. And my job as an intellectual is just to help them with ideas, run the philosophy forum. And that leads me to what is the role of intellectuals? We meet as a philosophy club, but why? Why bother? Why not just become a car mechanic? Well, I do think that much as I love car mechanics and they're incredibly important and all technical trades, I think there's a role for spiritual and intellectual work. And I think it's a form of healing. What we're doing in philosophy is like healing work, because ultimately we're souls in incarnation, and we have traumas, we have difficulties, we have tragedies, we have loss, we have grief. And I've been studying this last week and before the work of Maimonides, the greatest Jewish philosopher, who talked about how to deal with loss. He quoted Al-Kindi, the great Islamic philosopher, about the duty of philosophy is to rise above loss and grief. Yes, it exists. We all lose things all the time. We will lose our parents. We will lose tragically sometimes our children. Maimonides lost his brother. But that's part of life. And Al-Kindi said a very memorable thing. He said, if you expect to go through life and never experience loss, you're deluding yourself. It's part of the tragic reality that you have to face. And if you read your existentialist tradition correctly, Kierkegaard and Sartre and Heidegger, then, we have to take reality as it actually is. and we have to be mature enough intellectually to cope with that. And I think that, we need to then ask questions about what causes the loss, where does it come from. We can be rational in our grief. In Israel there was tremendous grief and sorrow because of the loss. They suffered 1,200 people killed on October the 7th and hostages taken. But then the response was maybe irrational. What Maimonides would say is they didn't respond in a rational way, because you should ask questions like, why did Hamas break out? Why were troops stood down on the border? Why were the security guards not there? Why were their calls for help not listened to? Why was the Air Force unable to respond? It's 3 minutes flying time to get over that place. Why weren't they summoned? Why had Israel been supporting the development of Hamas for the previous decades and more? These are rational responses to grief, and I yet to see them. There are intellectuals who've asked those questions, but it's not in the public domain. I had an interesting talk to my brother's partner, who's Jewish, who is full of the loss and the grief, but had never even heard the possibility that Likud and Netanyahu had been helping build up Hamas in order to dislodge the power of
PLO.
Yasser Arafat. Just it hadn't occurred to her, and so in her world bubble, media bubble, listening to friends from Israel and so on, it's just not, it's not conceived, and that's what we're facing is. So instead of that, what happened was the grief was then deflected into absolute rage and anger and hatred, and the mass killing and carnage of all Palestinians because they're all to blame. Now, what I'm learning from the study of philosophy and Maimonides is that kind of irrational reaction to loss is itself part of the problem, because then that causes counter rage and the whole world becomes a swathe with violence. My job as coordinator of philosophers of peace is to somehow damp these flames down, use reason to do so. And just following on from that, I want to say that this week I'm celebrating the fact that the International Conference on Peace and Non-Violent Action, organised by the Jains, the great ancient Indian spiritual tradition that believes in non-violence, ahimsa, that book has finally been published yesterday. Hooray! And my daughter Sophia gave a talk, which is in the book, it's the last paper, about the role of the arts in creating peace and non-violence. And other eminent intellectuals from all over the world gave papers which I've edited and produced yesterday. Finally, it's in the public domain. That's the antidote to the irrational hatred that rises up. Naturally, when you're wronged, you want to wrong back, but is there a non-violent way of dealing with this? That book is going to tell us how. Then I want to mention also the fact that in London, I think it was yesterday, there was a huge march of many tens of thousands of people.
More than 100.
They say 110,000, I don't know how they count these things. Organised by Tommy Robinson, who is a notorious extreme right activist, agitator. He's actually Irish, interesting enough, and that's not his name, he's a fake name. But he's on the extreme right fringe of world politics, and he was working with other people to create this great march. Now their position is, and I listened carefully to his discussion with Elon Musk, who spoke from America on a big screen, he wasn't there in person. Their position is that the white race is under attack. The British people are a white race, and therefore they have to defend themselves and have every right to. Black people are taking over Britain. They're the majority in cities like Birmingham and London and must be put back in their place. They don't have a right to do that. Muslims are particularly suspicious because they're brown. A lot of them are black, and they're not Christian, and they shouldn't be in Britain. What are they doing there? They have no right to be there. So Tommy Robinson and Elon Musk want them all to go away and not to have any influence or voice. So you get the idea. This is an extreme white racist kind of movement. Now, obviously there's 100,000 people in Britain that agree with this rhetoric. I don't. The reason I love London, I lived there for many years happily, is because of its multiculturalism. It's like a microcosm of the whole planet. There are parts of London which are very Turkish. You can walk around, all the shops are kebab shops, Turkish clothes, everyone speaks Turkish. There are parts of London that are very Bengali, in the East End, where the Gandhi Foundation offices are, where I used to work and teach. And you walk around, everyone speaks Bengali. There are parts that are very Jewish. You can go up to North London, everyone's walking around in Jewish costumes and long beards and, you know, the synagogues and all that. There are parts that are very Greek, around Moscow Road. There's a Greek cathedral, St. Sophia, which I used to, you know, frequent, and I did modern Greek classes near there. There are parts that are, you know, very African, like in Brixton and places where, you know, a rich culture, the reggae music blasts out and you can smell the marijuana walking down the road, and it's all very, you know, amazing. And then there's very Sikh areas, Punjabis in Southall. Beautiful shops selling saris and selling musical instruments from India. And so on and so on. And this is what I loved about London. And throughout it all, there's an undercurrent of you know, traditional British ethnic people that live there. Welsh. There's a strong Welsh community in London. They have a Welsh London society that's been going for a couple of centuries. Welsh intellectuals love to go to London, and still do. There's a strong Scottish community in London. Scotland Yard is named after the Scottish sort of activities. And there's a big Irish community in London. So, and you know, London, the name, was named after a Celtic god, Lugh. And it was originally spelled Luchtenum. When the Romans came, it was a small town on the banks of the Thames, most of it on the north bank. And the Romans took it over and made it into one of the great metropolitan ports of their empire for 400 years. And it would have been people from all over the empire, which stretched all the way from Syria, Turkey, North Africa, all of France, Gaul, Spain, Portugal, you know, would have been in London. And they built a temple to Mithras there, which is right in the heart of the city of London. It's now ruined, but archaeologists found it. And Mithras is a Persian god of truth and justice. And the Roman Empire loved Mithras because he symbolized the universality of what we should all be standing for, sort of proto-Masonic thing. And London's also the mothership of the Freemasonry tradition. In 1717, the Grand Lodge of England was set up there. And I've been there, and it has a big building, a museum. You know, so to me, what I loved about living in London and why I was proud to get my degrees from the University of London is it's like the whole world in microcosm. And I started lecturing whilst I was doing my PhD in interfaith approaches to peace building. And I gave talks about all the different religions of the planet, which you find in London. There's a Baha'i community, there's, you know, every religion. There's Japanese people in London, and they all get on. What I loved about London, you can walk down the street, get a bus, you'll see people from 10 or 20 different ethnicities. They all speak English, mostly, with their own accents, and they like each other. There was no tension, there was no violence on the streets. There was no need for heavy policing because we're all Londoners. We respect each other's cultures. Now that's the London I like. It's a multicultural, thriving, beautiful city, one of the great cities of the world. And I don't like people like Tommy Robinson coming up and saying, oh, we've got to hate, let's create hate between the blacks and the